Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
I was home alone, feeling sorry for myself, struggling to cope with my forced idleness. It was time to change tactics, from trying to get my job back to restoring my reputation. You see, 6 weeks ago, I was a project manager. Once I described my job to my wife as if I was juggling 500 balls at once, trying to make them all hit the ground at the same time. After 20 years, I finally landed in some larger projects and earned more money. But after paying for my children's college education and due to my wife's extravagant lifestyle, the money would have been enough only if I didn't want to die of old age at work. We didn't have much money in the bank, and the lack of income made the situation grim. Yes, I felt sorry for myself. The last project fell apart when the main subcontracting company went bankrupt. I had a friend still working at the company who obtained the minutes of the board meeting where I had convinced them not to go for the cheapest bidder, but it didn't help. If it came down to me or them, the board should have pressured the minutes secretary to verify their decision. I was home alone because my wife Sandra, to whom I've been married for 20 years, had gone to her sister's for the 5th Friday in a row. She asked me if I wanted to go, but as usual, I refused. Why should I help her sister plan her 15th anniversary? Sure. Her sister is fine, but I can't stand that arrogant jerk, her husband. He owns a small but successful manufacturing company that he started with his wife's inheritance. Damn, if he mentioned one more time that it was worth $12 million, I would choke that little toad. My self-imposed exile was interrupted by a doorbell at 2110. After 3 bourbons, I was slightly befuddled when I opened the door. It was my wife, or so I thought. Had she looked 10 years younger? I smiled when I realized it was Linda, Sandra's younger sister. Now it was obvious. Slightly shorter, a bit prettier, and with significantly larger breasts. I greeted her and offered coffee or tea. We chatted briefly. What's going on, Linda? I thought Sandra went to you and Neil to plan your anniversary? I didn't miss the fleeting embarrassment in Linda's expression. Our anniversary was 4 weeks ago, Dave. Now it was my turn to be embarrassed. Bourbon has many good uses, but enhancing mental sharpness isn't one of them. Instead of making a fool of myself, I kept silent. Linda clearly had something on her mind. Listen, I know you wouldn't want us to remind you, I suppose. I understand it might be awkward for you, but I just wanted to personally thank you for the gift you and Sandra gave. It was the most generous and thoughtful gift I could imagine, and we are very grateful. I filed my previous thoughts under slightly puzzling. Now I was completely thrown off. Linda, what are you talking about? Well, if you want to play a denial, I can play along. I'm not entirely sure what Sandra told you. Damn, it's a bit embarrassing. She paused to compose herself, clearly unprepared for my reaction. I'm sure Sandra told you. I am frigid. I never liked sex. Of course, I fulfill my marital duties to Neil once a week if necessary, but I hate it. That's why, as Neil says, all the romance has gone from our marriage, and he must be right. We haven't gone out together for an eternity. Moreover, we couldn't conceive a child. Honestly, it's fortunate we've come this far. That's why your gift with Sandra meant so much to Neil and me. I just wanted to thank you personally. I really envy you, Dave. You must have a really strong marriage if you trust Linda so much. I don't know if she caught my utterly stunned expression, but even if she did, it didn't stop her from kissing me on the lips. Thank you. Dave, you're a gem. What the hell is going on, Linda? Where is Sandra? What? She's on a date with Neil, silly. My suddenly shocked look full of painful anger must have finally reached the smiling bride. I repeat, Linda, what the hell is happening? Well, Sandra said it was your idea. You're in her gift for our anniversary. 10 dates with Neil over 10 weeks. Neil gets 10 weeks of romance, and I get 10 weeks without advances. Sandra said you agreed it would spice up your faltering sex life. Knowing she was on a date with another man would trigger your competitive instinct. Judging by what she told me, you've been doing well with her in the bedroom for the past 4 weeks, you know. She stopped. I don't know what expression I had on my face, but it was enough for Linda to see that something was clearly wrong. Finally, I regained my mental capacity to hiss and whisper. Sandra and I haven't made love for more than 6 weeks. Are you saying she's on a date now? That bastard, they might have booked a hotel while we were talking. No, dummy, I always insist they come back to our house for sex. What, you mean they've already done it? Yes, they had sex after their first date. Of course, Dave, you knew. That was the agreement, right? Please tell me you knew. They say a picture paints 1,000 words. From this picture, I walked to the nearest wall and punched a hole in the drywall. Linda was shocked but composed herself while I nursed my hand. Damn, Dave, I can't believe Sandra is playing me and Neil like this. You really had no idea, did you? Her eyes suddenly hardened. We have to stop her. I was several steps ahead of her. I was dialing the number on my phone. Sandra answered on the 6th ring, panting. You cheating scum. Get home now so we can sort this out. Linda told me all about what you've been doing. I can't, Dave. I'm a bit busy right now. Yeah, you're in the very act of destroying our marriage. You've been whining since the kids left home for me to let you stray. Well, the answer was no, then, and it's still a damn no. Just because you found a good way to justify it to yourself doesn't make it right. No, Dave, listen. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I made a promise to Neil and Linda, and you always told me I should keep my promises. In 5 weeks it will all be over and we can return to normal life. If it's a problem, maybe I can ask them if they can release me from my obligation, but it will depend on them. I can't believe this at all. Go home right now. No, Dave, a promise is a promise. Besides, you don't own me, so I can do what I like. Then the call ended. Hurry, Linda, we must get to your house. I must stop this mess. Drive, I've had too much to drink. By the time we arrived, the house was empty. Signs of a hasty departure were everywhere. Linda looked almost as despondent as I did. I have an idea. I'll call Neil and tell him what she's up to. He won't continue if he knows you disapprove. Both their phones went straight to voicemail for the next several hours. Around 2 a.m., I went home. Linda was as devastated as I was, complicit in the betrayal. I made her promise to tell her husband that he doesn't have my blessing to sleep with my wife and to make it clear she's withdrawing her blessing. The deal was definitely off. By Sunday noon, neither Linda nor I had heard from our spouses. They also didn't answer calls. This gave me enough time to reflect. What else could I have done? Sleep was out of the question. When did our marriage start to decline? As far as I knew, we had a normal, healthy relationship. Nothing indicated that we were heading towards the crash site of this train. By Sunday afternoon, I realized that waiting at home like a petitioner made me feel powerless. I packed a few suitcases and moved to a motel. I hadn't heard from anyone until Linda called at noon on Monday. Dave, Neil came back last night. I asked him where he had been, and he said that after you called Sandra on Friday evening, they moved to a motel. Dave, Neil heard everything when you called. He already knew that you weren't aware of this plan. I asked him why he did it, and he said. She paused and sobbed for a while. He said that I was so lifeless that he wouldn't pass up the chance to get with someone like Sandra. Oh, Dave, it was so hurtful. I made him promise to stop seeing Sandra. I recorded the conversation on my phone, in case you don't believe me. Of course, I believe you, Linda. Keep the recording anyway, it might come in handy. I also went to see Sandra today. She was vile, too. She said that if I were the right kind of woman, I could keep my husband in check. That witch has always mocked me. I asked her if she had talked to you, and she said she would wait until you stopped freaking out and crawled back home. Dave, she's planning to deceive you. I'm so upset and confused by all this, I don't know what to do. Don't do anything, Linda. Tomorrow I'm going to a lawyer, maybe then things will become clearer. Well, I must say, visiting the lawyer was not uplifting. Sandra will get half of everything we have. The only gem I got from him came at the very end. At first, I didn't understand what he was trying to say. He explained that the only time he saw a guy come out better in a situation like mine was when the husband had some spicy videos with which he could threaten his wife. Then he asked, rather suggestively, if Sandra's parents were still alive and if they went to church at all, while raising his eyebrows and looking at me. What a guy. On Wednesday, I sneaked into my old house and installed cameras in the bedroom and living room. They transmitted everything to a hard drive I hid in the basement. According to the seller, I only needed to change the batteries and download the hard drive every 4 to 5 days, depending on usage. That night Sandra finally deigned to send me a message asking when I would return home. I replied that I was out of town for a few weeks. You have a much better chance of catching a mouse if it thinks the cat is far away. It began to seem like Sandra didn't care about our marriage. I knew I certainly didn't. I kept in touch with Linda. On Friday evening, she called me and said that Neil hadn't come home. I offered to pick her up, and we went out to dinner. They say misery loves company. We managed to distract each other and had a great time. On the way back to her place, I told her about the cameras I had installed but made her promise to keep everything secret. I asked her what she would do if she could prove that Neil was cheating on her. She said probably nothing. I thought if I could confront her with Neil's infidelity, she might become embittered and consider divorce. It was the only way to get back at the bastard, other than smashing his face. I drove past my house and, of course, saw his car in the driveway. Linda cried all the way home and ran out of the car straight to her house. I went to get her and put her in bed and held her in my arms until she cried again. I was eager for Monday, the next safe time to retrieve the video recording. Linda surprised me by calling on Saturday evening. She wanted to meet again to make Neil jealous. I had nothing to lose, so I agreed. After dinner, we went dancing and had a good time. I took her home at 1:30 a.m. even before we arrived. Linda worried that Neil might have used her absence to secretly return to Sandra, but his car was at her house. At 9 a.m. on Monday, I sneaked into my old house and swapped the hard drives and batteries. Still jobless, I was free all day to review them. By the afternoon, I mustered the courage to look. Until then, all this had been somewhat of an academic exercise. Now the evidence was right in front of me. I found myself closing my eyes when the footage of them entering the bedroom came up. I realized the camera was slightly off. It only captured the upper half of their bodies, but the sound was clear. I opened my eyes again soon after, faintly noting his climactic grumbling. When I looked at the scene, they were lying next to each other and talking. I listened. Then I excitedly called Linda and told her to bring her ass to my motel. She arrived within 20 minutes. Linda, you have to see this. Linda grabbed a bottle of wine from the minibar, and I turned on my laptop and started the playback. I started when Sandra and Neil began their post-coital conversation. When are you going to get my little sister served with the papers, Neil? It would be great if we could have a spring wedding. My lawyer was going to file on Monday and serve her Tuesday or Wednesday, darling. I don't want to wait too long. If she can get evidence earlier, I'll screw up this whole prenup thing. Don't you feel sorry for that naive fool? No, just regret staying with the frigid fool for so long. You know what it's like trying to stay aroused when the other person just lies there and looks like they hate every moment of it. Sandra gave a strange smile but said nothing. What about you, Sandy? Do you feel anything for Dave? I wish you hadn't asked that. Yes, I feel bad. He was a great husband and father, and he's good in bed. But it's time for a change. He's not succeeding where you have, honey. To hell with him, to hell with them both. Linda was devastated. I hugged her and stopped her as she poured a third glass of wine. She cried for a long time. I knew how she felt. I was there 10 days ago. Finally, she calmed down. Linda, what's this prenup that Neil mentioned? Oh, Dad made us sign it before we got married. What's in it, Linda? It was Dad's attempt to protect my inheritance. If Neil cheats, I get everything. I think there's a copy at home. Linda, do you realize what this all means? What, Dave? This means that either tomorrow or the next day, you'll be served with divorce papers due to irreconcilable differences. He'll ask for half of the house, half of the bank accounts, and half of the company. How much money do you have in the bank? Last time I checked, it was almost $2 million. Wow, how badly do you want to ruin his life, Linda? As much as I can, Dave. What can you do? Well, it seems to me that if you file for divorce citing marital infidelity, using my video as evidence, he'll walk away with just his shirt, and you'll become a very wealthy divorcee with a huge bank account, a beautiful home, and a $12 million company. Do you want to do this, Linda? With a smile wider than a used car salesman's, Linda laughed. Isn't it obvious? Marry me, darling, marry me. Knowing me for so long, she got the joke and laughed again. We hugged once more before getting serious again. Linda asked, "Are you sure the video is good enough? Have you watched it all?" After admitting I closed my eyes during the indecent parts, Linda insisted we watch it all together. She held my hand to help me get through it. As the sexual parts began, it was like a brainwash. It showed my dear wife and Neil getting undressed. With no attempt at foreplay, Neil and Sandra had sex. The quality was good enough to see her displeased, frowning look. 43-year-old women need some warm-up. Ungraciously, he just started having sex. Sandra made all the right noises, but her face remained neutral. I almost choked when, after about a minute and a half, she actually looked at her watch behind his back. I paused the video. Linda, is this typical behavior for Neil? Yep. I assume you were a virgin when you got married. Am I right? Of course, I was, Dave. Risking this being too personal, Lynn, how long is Neil, his thing? About this, Dave, she said, showing with her thumb and forefinger. No, I mean when it's hard, Linda. It's like this when hard, Dave. I couldn't stop laughing. Well, Lynn, I think I've solved another one of your problems. No foreplay with his technique, and with such a small package, it's no wonder you don't enjoy sex. You see, Linda, I don't think you're frigid at all. That would be fantastic, Dave. Can I go to a doctor and have some tests done or something? I stood up and hugged her. I whispered in her ear, let Dr. Dave see what he can find. Linda's moans started 30 seconds after I began kissing her neck. They only stopped after 45 minutes when the screams began. 45 minutes that included undressing and caressing every part of her magnificent body. She was still a bit nervous when I kissed her, but that soon changed. After her first climax, I tried to go further, but she had never experienced anything like it. With her hands, she insistently kept my head there for the second round. When she fell asleep, exhausted but satisfied, I slipped out to prepare some snacks. When I returned, Linda was just coming out of the shower. She looked very nervous. This soon passed when I kissed her deeply and for a very long time. This time, I resisted her hands pushing my head and made love to her as it should be. I don't claim to be a Casanova with immense talent, but she seemed to have no complaints. We spent the rest of the day and night kissing, making love, and talking. The next day, Linda requested and secured an emergency meeting with her lawyer. Armed with my video and 2 statements, he began the case. The rest of the day and night, Linda and I played Scrabble. Honestly, guys, what did you think we were doing? Linda was on a mission to make up for lost time. I learned that there were some positions that just didn't work. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't muffle her screams with a pillow in some of them. Both of our phones were ringing for the second evening in a row, but we ignored them. On Wednesday morning, Linda called Neil and told him she would be home all afternoon. Sure enough, at 3:15 p.m., there was a knock at the door. I opened it to see a young guy in a suit. Please come in, we've been expecting you. Linda is in the bathroom. Would you like some coffee? Slightly bewildered, he automatically agreed and entered. I yelled, Linda, the process server is here with your divorce papers. While we waited, we chatted. He seemed like a decent guy, named Phil. By the time Linda came out, our coffee was half ready. You know women in bathrooms. She approached Phil. Yes, I'm Linda Winters. You have something I want. After Phil did his official bit, we chatted for a while longer. Turns out it was a crappy job but well paid. He declined a second cup and thanked us for such a unique experience. Strange but pleasant, Linda got one of his business cards. Resisting the urge to laugh, we left the sealed envelope on the table as we headed back to the motel. I waited for Sandra to return home from work in the evening. I took the opportunity to swap out the hard drive and batteries. I cut off her half-hearted apologies and immediately started showing the edited highlights of her home video. She reacted furiously when I said that when she hands me the divorce papers, they'd better be damn generous, or the video goes public. She threw me out. Her cautious plan had derailed and crashed into the ravine. The next day, Linda, I, and our new friend Phil waited for Neil when he returned home. Phil enjoyed it too. I stayed while Neil packed his things, always positioning myself between him and Linda. I wanted him to try something, and he knew it. 65 minutes later, he was gone. 35 minutes later, all the locks were changed. The bank and business accounts had already been frozen. Answering Sandra's call at 9 p.m., I was puzzled by her friendly tone. She said she just wanted to apologize in person for the terrible way she had ended our marriage. For old time's sake, I went to the house. There was no answer to my knock, so I tried the door. It was unlocked. I heard Sandra's passionate screams echoing up the stairs. Playing their game, I approached and peeked into our bedroom. Relieved, I felt nothing but contempt for what I saw. After half a minute, Sandra pretended to see me for the first time. You didn't plan to miss this, did you, Dave? Don't worry about me. I've got a real man now who satisfies me. Don't worry, dear. Ignoring the curses and flying objects, I quickly retreated, wondering what all this was about. The next day, my first task at the new job was to fire my predecessor. The company, based on her money, was registered in Linda's name. Neil should have known his company adhered to a strict moral code. After all, he wrote the damn thing. Knowing nothing about manufacturing, I spent the morning talking with the senior staff and appointing an interim manager. I received their full support. I had just finished the essentials when I was arrested, apparently for assaulting Sandra Brown and Neil Winters. I had to admire the strategy. It explained the purpose of the previous night. It was somewhat awkward. At the police station, I was viewed as a wife-beater. That same day, I posted bail, using almost all the savings I had left in the bank. I was a bit surprised Sandra hadn't drained it yet. The next day, I received a restraining order against Sandra, Neil, and my old house. It was valid for 6 months. I moved in with Linda while the lawyers handled their business. The sex was fantastic. Linda had a mission to make up for lost time. Maintaining outward calm, I endured the shame of extramarital sex. We were not interested in what the exes were doing, although we heard they were no longer together. Sandra might have settled for a small tool for a rich man, but not for a poor one. 3 months later, Linda's divorce and the civil case came up. Neil didn't try to fight the divorce but, of course, fought the infidelity charge with all his might. He tried to claim that since the sex between him and Sandra was with Linda's full consent, it wasn't adultery. He and Sandra testified to this. Naturally, I testified for Linda, stating that we both asked them to stop when I found out, and Linda discovered I was unwilling to participate. I can't express how proud I was of Linda that day. She managed to reveal the whole story of her apparent fragility and then discovered it was all due to Neil's tiny equipment and selfish technique, with her head held high. The press gallery, always fascinated by a sex scandal, reveled in it. The recording made by Linda, where she begged Neil to end his affair, tipped the scales, and his plea was tossed aside. Crushed and with his manhood destroyed, Neil left town. For another 3 months, we saw neither Neil nor Sandra. Sandra gave me a spiteful smile from the witness stand during my trial. She was very convincing, tearfully describing how I found her in bed with Neil. She knew she was wrong but definitely did not deserve to be beaten. The judge scolded me when I applauded her performance at the end. Neil was somewhat less convincing as he described how he couldn't measure up to my size and fury when I caught him with my wife. This time I respected the judge and refrained from applauding. The prosecution lawyer tried to object when my lawyer presented the recording from the hidden camera in the living room as evidence, explaining why it had not been submitted during the investigation. My lawyer apologized to the judge and explained that I couldn't retrieve the hard drive until the day before because the restraining order was still in effect. In reality, Linda had taken it 2 days after my arrest, but my lawyer was unaware of this. I watched Sandra's and Neil's faces as they watched the unfolding drama. This time I had positioned the camera correctly. It clearly showed them plotting at the kitchen table after I left. They were smart enough to remove the bedroom camera, but I didn't know if they thought to look elsewhere and had missed this one. After a prolonged silent discussion in the courtroom, we saw Neil wrap a towel around his hand and knock Sandra to the floor. Being a fighter, she got up again, ready for the second round, happily using a frying pan on Neil. Wasn't Neil supposed to go first? The courtroom erupted, so I strained to hear my case being dismissed, and the judge ordering the bailiff to arrest them. There are 2 crimes judges hate: contempt of court and perjury. They work hard for their positions, and calling a trial into question for these crimes is contempt in itself. Of course, I could have provided the video earlier and charged them with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice or making false statements, but I didn't. Both Linda and I agreed that their pitiful and contemptible behavior toward us deserved our best response. By the time I cleared my name with the waiting media, the police chief wanted a word. He apologized for my wrongful arrest. I immediately forgave him, and we spoke for a few minutes. As we finished, Sandra was released. She headed towards Linda with clear malicious intent. I stood between my ex-lover and my current love. "Sandra, you wouldn't hit a pregnant woman, would you?" Sandra stopped. Her face went through several shades of extreme upset, then she just turned away before we could see her tears. 2 months later, I read in the newspaper that the happy couple received a minimal sentence for perjury, 12 months in jail. Well, time to start this divorce and sell this house. I thought Sandra was right. Her affair with Neil did awaken a competitive instinct in me. Unfortunately, it was not the instinct to win back my spouse through sex, but the baser instinct to kill and tear apart. 2 nights later, sweaty, Linda and I continued our ongoing discussion. We carried on our feverish activities in the bedroom as Linda insisted she needed to make up for 15 years of lost pleasure. By my calculations, she was only 8 years overdue. She insisted it was no less than 12. While I lay there stroking her rounded belly, we talked. Isn't it silly, dear? If only they had done everything properly, asked for a divorce first and then started their thing, things would be different today. I think we would have been devastated, but they would be free and wealthy, enjoying all the sex they could handle. Something tells me Neil is getting all the sex he can handle now. They say Bubba can be quite insistent. Now shut up and let's try to catch up on those 12 years. 8 years, you insatiable woman. Yesterday. What would you like to do for our 15th anniversary, Dave? Nothing special. Absolutely nothing.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.